Hello everyone, Ember Power here, and welcome back to a new video. In this one I'm going to be taking a look at a really fun format called Lechonk League. So Lechonk League is basically a format for very cheap basic Pokemon. So if you're playing on a budget or you just want to try out something different, then this format is for you. So the main premise on rules of a Chunk League is that players must run at least 10 to 20 Pokemon. I would say about 12 to 15 is about right, but if you want to run less or you want to run a bit more, that's absolutely fine. But no more than 4 of each type and 4 of each basic energy. So in this way, players are encouraged to basically build a more creative deck using Pokemon of different types rather than just stick to 1 or 2 typings. The Pokemon in Special Energy are singleton, which means you can only play 1 copy of each in the deck if you're not familiar with that. But the trainers can be 2 copies, which just helps with consistency. Now, this is very similar to another format called Mini League, which there was a couple of events for Mini League. I think there was 2 events around December time. So that's kind of like what this format is based off. So if you've heard of Mini League or you've seen any videos on that, then this should look very familiar. Players must also build decks from a limited card pool to prevent anything too broken, e.g. some basics do 40 damage for 2 energy, which is just unfortunately a wee bit too strong for this format because the average HP is going to be about 60 or less. So yeah, if you're doing 40, then that's way too much. But the format is based around the notorious Rainbow Hustle Belt combo. So originally, for some context, this format you could only play these 3 Pokemon, Gumi, Magikarp, and Lechonk. As terrible as that sounds, I thought it was a really funny idea. And basically, Hustlebelt said that if this Pokemon had 30 or less HP remaining, I believe, its attacks do plus 30 damage or something like that. So what you could do is you could put a Rainbow Energy on a Gumi or a Magikarp, reduce its HP down by 10, but then do like plus 30, or I believe it was plus 60 damage actually. So it was a massive buff, but unfortunately Hustlebelt have since been removed from this format as more Pokemon were added. So that's kind of like some loose context, I guess. These rules are just guidelines. Feel free to change up to suit your group. So if you don't like anything, like if you think some Pokemon are just too broken, if you think some trainers are just too boring, just feel free to remove them. Like, it's obviously nothing serious. Obviously, if I was to run an event for this format, then I would be using these rules. But if you just want to try this out with your friends, of course, then feel free to change it up. However, unfortunately, Pokemon TCG Live currently doesn't support many legal cards for the format, so there is plenty of cards from XY trainers and Pokemon alike that would be a very cool addition to this format, but unfortunately, Pokemon TCG Live Expanded doesn't support them. So you could, in theory, build a deck on TCG Live, but you can't challenge your friends to an expanded match, which is really unfortunate. So until they've fixed that and updated the XY formats for expanded on TS2 Live, unfortunately many of these cards won't be legal online. I have made a note of all the Pokemon that are legal, and I'm going to showcase them in X and Y and Sun and Moon respectively. So Sun and Moon, Sword and Shield, and then X and Y. So what is actually the point of the Chonk League? It does look pretty dumb, and mostly is, to be fair, but the main point is to use Disruption and the limited mons strategically to get the edge over an opponent. So the format is also designed to be really cheap, with the majority of mons being commons, and the best trainers being pretty easy to pick up because they're not that overpowered. The power creep is also pretty limited, meaning if there's a powerful card, weakness can usually take care of it thanks to the low HP. So if you're playing, you have to play at least 10 to 15 Pokemon, and if you're only playing 4 of each Pokemon and 4 of each energy, it doesn't take a genius to realize that you kind of have to play at least 3 types in your deck, really. So a nice, easy way of being able to counter other decks in the format. The power creep is, I just read that, never mind. The format is also designed to make it easy to fit more than one archetype in a deck, which I've just mentioned, allowing players maximum creativity and type coverage. So, Colorless is obviously a bit of a bland one because it typically just has a weakness and a resistance and doesn't hit anything for weakness. However, Colorless is kind of nice in the format because it means that no matter what energy you have in play that turn, or you have in hand, I should say, it still means you have at least something to attach to. So the Trunk League updates and events. In terms of current plans for an event, there are none, although this might change in the future when I have more time. The aim is to add several new cards in the form of via small updates. There are currently several updates planned, including cards from Scarlet and Violet, which will be the next video on this format, which I'll cover like everything that I would recommend that you should play from Scarlet and Violet. Each update will be an opportunity to remove broken cards as well, so that's something worth bearing in mind. Though there is only one cool card pool currently, the plan would be to create 2 card pools for players who want a more controlled format. So basically, when it gets to the point where there's like several hundred commons that are legal, basically what I might do is divide the card pool into 2. So there is just better decks in each format, as opposed to, there's only 4 so playable decks from a massive wide range of card pools, if that makes sense. So this would likely be added somewhere in the Scarlet Violet era, somewhere down the line. So the current update plan is what we have right now. So that's the current card pool. Version 2 is the Crown Zenith update. So if you can't tell already, this video was supposed to come out months ago, and I put it off and put it off. So Crown Zenith is here. That's why it's highlighted green. So I'll have that in the video as well. Version 3 is the Fossil update, which I'll release with the Scarlet and Violet update. So they will come just together. And I say update, it's basically just me going over recommended fun cards to try out in the format. So that's kind of like what the update means. And then version 6 will be Paldea Evolved and Team Plasma. So Paldea Evolved conveniently does get fully revealed this Friday, because we'll see the rest of Snow Hazard and Clayburst, and we've already seen Triple Beat, so that's easy enough. I've also picked out some Team Plasma cards I think are okay, so that's fun. And then version 7 will be whatever combines to make Scarlet and Violet set 3. So as for some Sun and Moon Soul and Shield mons, I'm not going to sit here and read every single one of them because there's a lot to get through, and this is only one of 5 pages, I believe. But I'll just give a quick overview of some of the more like common attributes you'll start to see with these Pokemon. Typically, I went for stuff that has interesting effects and attacks. Occasionally you will get a fun ability like Levitate on Tynamo or Touch of Happiness on Togepi. But typically, there's not that many abilities in this format. It's more about attacks. And one of the best ways of actually racking up damage in this format is through special conditions. So, Burn, Poison, and Confusion. So having access to those special conditions, and special conditions being just a bigger part of this format than standard, is really fun. So I definitely like that about it. But as you can see here, there's just like a bunch of different stuff that's fun to use. You can maybe build an archetype around different special conditions like Poison and Sleep, for example, and then maybe lean into Disruption, such as a Noibat on the bottom left, which says your opponent reveals a hand and you have to discard any number of items you may find there. So there's definitely some solid disruption as well as some solid damage being dealt here. Then we see page 2, which is kind of just more of the same. Some more interesting ones I will point out is the 2 Sandiles. The Sandile on the top right has Dredge Up, which is just mill 3. It is for 4 energy, which is extremely expensive in this format, but mill 3 is, pretty decent if your opponent ends up getting something stuck in the active. Also have a Sandile, which has the attack Grandiose Fangs. It's really powerful, which does 30 damage. And if your opponent's Pokemon is knocked out by this damage from this attack, I believe, the next turn it does 120 more. So if you essentially do like this 2-hit KO move, then you can do a massive 1-hit KO the following turn. So, for 3 energy, it's very expensive, but something to bear in mind. There's also like a lot of Pokemon that you'll see repeatedly, such as Cutiefly, Feebas, Gumi, and Flabebe, because they all typically have low HP, and that's why they're pretty prevalent in this format. There's also some other ones like Eevee, which typically get a lot of cards as well, because colorless Pokemon are fun to have in this format. I do think colors do add at least an interesting flavor because they're not really hitting anything for weakness, which, makes sense, they're colorless. But still, it is interesting nonetheless. So page 3 is going to be even more Pokemon. We do see several archetypes kind of emerging in page 3. There's stuff like the Lost Zone package in the form of Natu and a Clefairy. Well, it's not Clefairy, it's the Cottony. Oh yeah, Cottony. So we've got Cottony and Natu with Lost March. Honestly, Lost March is maybe a wee bit too strong in this format. It wasn't that strong in Mini League. It was much more balanced because you could only play 1 Lost Blender in your deck. But here, because you can play 2 Lost Blender, you can theoretically do up to 80 damage with Lost March, which is of course very strong. So for 2 energy, Natu is very, very strong. There's also some other stuff like Bird Keeper's Sky Circus kind of combos. There's also the different baby Pokemon if you want to end your turn to use an effect. A lot of them do require you to flip a coin, which is, well, a massive pain. But it does mean that, if you have nothing else to do that turn and you don't want to go all offensive and start attacking, then you have those options. There's also some very powerful cards like Spinnerack with Spider Scram, which you send it to the Lost Zone, but then you do Poison and Polarisis. And then there's also stuff like Venonat, which allows you to look at the top 7 cards of your deck. You take one of them and shuffle the rest back in. So very powerful in that regard. And we see this last page, or second last page, of Sun and Moon Mons. This was originally supposed to be like a separate update kind of thing, but it just kind of got shoehorned on the end here. But it does feature the Mad Party deck-ish. There's like several pieces of it. Of course, we can't have like too much of one archetype, otherwise it would be dominant and it would do too much damage. But typically, Poltergeist, Dedenne, and Bumblebee should be enough to see you through a game. There's also some additional mill pieces like Dunsparce, which should help with that, Diglett, which has the ability Underground Work, as well as some little smaller combos such as Tentacle and Gligar having synergy with the Janine supporter card. There's also Pachirisu, Mulga, and Dedenne, all with Nuzzle, so there's like some synergy going on there. And there is like other synergy with control-based stuff like Drillbur shuffling back in cards. Honestly, I'm not sure how strong control is in this format, but there is definitely enough cards that mill and discard energy. So this last page, just showing keep going with the Sun and Moon, Sword and Shield ones. I wasn't originally going to have so many off to start off with, but because I realized that TCG Live just doesn't have X and Y currently, it was better to try and reach out and find even more Pokemon to include. And thankfully, there are some interesting ones, like this Woobat over in the top right corner, which is very strong. It says if you have no cards in hand, this attack does 30 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon. Sometimes that will be half the HP of all of your opponent's Pokemon, which is absolutely insane. There is a lot of like bench protection in the format though, thankfully, but yeah, very, very strong card. There's also Nicotit with Investigate, so your opponent reveals their hand, shuffles it, put it in the bottom of their deck, and then they draw 3 cards, so yeah, pretty devastating disruption from there. So this is just some X and Y mons. Currently, these aren't in use in live, so I won't really spend too much time on these ones. Notably, there's an awful lot of Pokemon from the Evolution set, or I think it's Generations as well as the other one. So there is like a lot of Gen 1 Pokemon there. Some of these are just really cool, to be honest. There's like a Ghastly, which has the attack Little Grudge, which I think is like a one-off. Like no other Pokemon has this attack currently in the TCG. There's like Mew with Natural Shield, which is interesting. Diglett, which has Submerge, so it can't be damaged while on the bench, also has a 30 snipe, which is very strong. Rattata can discard a tool card, Clefairy can copy any attack, and Porygon can change the weakness of your opponent's active Pokemon. So as you can see, despite commons being very, very mediocre and standard, in a format where they are the only Pokemon that can see play, they do have some very strong attacks against each other, so something to bear in mind when creating one of these decks. There's also just some more X and Y mons here. Typically, I pulled some more from Generations, as seen on the top row. There's also some ones from like older Sun and Moon sets, like not older Sun and Moon, but XY sets like Breakpoint and Beyond. There's also some like black and white cards in here, I think. Like the Spritzee, I think, is too old. There's also like some more interesting Pokemon as well, like Unknown with Farewell Letter, as well as Hoot Hoot with Item Disruptions. So pretty cool to see. And then page 3 of X and Y. They're still going, I know. But there is some cool ones. Again, there is cool ones. I do like dragon types a lot because they're essentially rewarding you for playing 2 other types. So, for example, Bagon attacks for water, fire, water, fire energy. So, if you're playing water and fire types, Bagon's like a natural choice to have in the deck. So, very cool to see that. Next up, I do want to briefly talk about stage 1s. Some stage 1s are under consideration. I'd say Evolution's Raticate is the first stage 1 that I would, say that's absolutely fine. Feel free to include this in your deck. These would allow for some more powerful upgrades to decks. However, most of the stage 1s are not super good. There is some of them that are like okay, but even in this format, they're not that powerful. So some XY older stage 1s, you'll notice very quickly there's one of these that ain't like the others. That's going to be Gyarados. Gyarados is kind of like hit and miss. I keep just tossing and choosing between like, is Gyarados actually that balanced? 130 HP is an awful lot. Bubble Beam can also do 50 damage, which is nearly a one-hit kill on everything, while also doing potential paralysis, which is like alarm bells are ringing for Gyarados for sure. But he is under consideration still because I think it's just a cool card and it'd be interesting to see what a big tank Pokemon would look like in this format. But that's just like my 2 cents, still under experimentation. The rest of these, they were just picked because they typically don't do a lot of damage while also having interesting effects, like Gabite has a Pokemon Search, Ninjask is involved with Mill, and then Altaria is more of a draw kind of card. And we see some Sun and Moon ones and Sword and Shield, so these ones are the ones that you can currently use on TCG Live. There is stuff like Lapent with top entry, which is kind of cool. Two different Floettas to choose, and there's already like 4 different Flabébés, so yeah, definitely some strong bias towards that evolution line, but it is pretty cool to see that fairy types, are very decent in this format. So there's also some bold exceptions to quickly run over. Typically, these are Pokemon that you'd expect to see here, like Mimikyu, Jirachi, Clefairy, the Manaphy and Celebi from Shining Fates. There's also several Chatots, which I think are pretty fun. There's Machado with Shadow Incantation, a Spiritomb, which is pretty fun. There's Fion, which can force a Gust, Smeargle, which can copy a supporter effect, Mimikyu, which can potentially do some Paralysis, and then a Kixelion, which can do 60 damage to an evolution Pokemon. So if there's ever an evolution Pokemon that's really strong, Kixelion is a very decent tech card. So yeah, pretty fun for the bold exceptions. I think all of these are perfectly balanced. I don't think there's any one that's too broken. Maybe the Jirachi is too strong with Stellar Wish and Slap doing 30 damage, but yeah, I think Jirachi is still okay. Then we see some other additions, X, Y, and older. So typically, I think some of these may be questionable. For example, the Tentacle and the Torchic are ancient traits that are pretty strong. But yeah, I think these are pretty okay, to be honest. Like, even Lunatone, I think, is okay despite doing 30 damage and having 90 HP, which is very, very good. Jinx healing 10 damage is fine. Several Spiritombs, because Spiritomb's just such a fun card and always gets cool cards for some reason, so always nice to see that. And then as for a Crown Zenith update, there is just plenty of Pokemon that were added. Most of them were pretty bland, but I just kind of selected 10 Pokemon here that I thought were, at least a little bit more interesting. Fighting types are not that common in this format, so I thought it was important to highlight Baltoy and Rockruff. So that's kind of cool to see. There's even a Bidoof, which can be protected while on the bench. There's like a new Chatot, which is also fine. So yeah, several more interesting options. Nothing too crazy, but there if you want them. So these ones are just some more X and Y evolution ones. I would say use these with caution, but I would honestly give them a pass. Stuff like Surfing Pikachu and Flying Pikachu might just be a little bit too broken, but honestly, I think they're okay in the long run, and these guys should be okay to use. So as for legal supporters, you'll kind of notice a trend with these, that they're nothing too crazy or too powerful. Unfortunately, I haven't got round to organizing them into X, Y, or beyond. So I have Sun and Moon, and Sword and Shield is of course only legal on TS2 Live, something that we've been trying to hammer in this whole video, I guess. But legal supporters, there's still plenty to choose from, and I think there's a decent amount of variety. Remember, you can play up to 2 of each of these, so something worth bearing in mind if you're going for a more disruption or consistent focused deck. And for legal items, similar story, there's nothing like Quick Ball and Nest Ball currently in the format. That might change at some point, but because you can play 2 copies, it seems, seems a bit hit and miss whether or not Quick Ball or Nest Ball really should be in this kind of format. But just some example of some items that are legal or recommended. Again, continuing that trend of just good but nothing too crazy. There is stuff like Unidentified Fossil and Fossil Excavation Map, which are kind of like a neat combo if you want to have a constant pivot. There's stuff like Plus Power, which is very strong, allowing you to increase your damage by plus 10. But typically, these are like nothing too crazy, like they're nothing that broken, and they should be pretty easy to acquire and craft as well. And then some additional items, stuff like Giant Cape is really strong actually, HP increased by plus 20. Trick Shovel's good in mill, Buddy Buddy Rescue is good for recovery, Time Map is a favorite, and then Broly just narrowly made it onto the list as an extra supporter card. And we see some Special Energy. Special Energy is currently singleton, so you can't play more than 1 copy of each of these in your deck, but I do think they are pretty interesting to say the least. Spiral Energy, Impact Energy, Fusion Strike Energy, and so forth. I do believe these are an interesting addition to the format, and they add a cool dynamic. There's also the Raticate that did 60 damage for each Special Energy in your opponent's discard pile, so you will get punished if you have these in play, and then they get discarded, so cool to see. As for stadiums, again, similar story with stadiums, you can play up to 2 of each of these in your deck. Typically, I don't think any deck needs to be playing more than 3 or 4 realistically, but you could play more, I guess, if you really wanted to. But stuff like Tower of Darkness allows you to play other single strike cards and use that as a mini draw engine, so there's at least limited applications there. There's also stuff like Sky Pillar, which prevents bench damage, Lysander Labs, which shuts off tools, Glimwood Tangle, which allows you to reflip all the many coins. So there's just a lot of different choices that players can choose from, and ultimately I think stadiums are a really cool addition to the format. Just very, very quickly glancing over this first list here. This was just a very initial draft of the format. Do not take this as gospel or anything. This was just something I was experimenting a bit with, just to see like how good the game was. Like, how did the format feel with shuffle draw? Like, how did it feel with consistency? I ran it against the trainer challenge NPC at one point, I think, against Zach or somebody, just to see like how consistent it was. And I was honestly surprised with just how consistent it is. Supporters like Roxy are just very, very strong, and the Lost Zone engine is very strong altogether. So we'll have to see how that develops moving forward, but I could definitely see the Lost Zone engine being probably the most powerful archetype, honestly, moving forward, which is probably not what you want to hear if Lost Zone is the best deck in Standard, but something worth consideration. So this is going to be a similar kind of Lost Zone deck, but this time actually playing the Gyarados from XY with Glimwood Tangle. So a very, very fun deck to try out and play because Gyarados is kind of OP in this format, but again, just something interesting and worth mentioning. So these are some future additions. They're kind of under review, open to suggestions. I don't think these Pokemon should be in the format. They're kind of like these ones where if they get set up, they're kind of infinitely more powerful than everything else combined. So I don't think these should be in. Maybe Rayquaza and Kyurem are okay. But, stuff like Ultra Necrozma and Ghostlord I think are maybe just a wee bit too strong, but that's just my 2 cents. But either way, thanks for watching. It's been Ember Power. Let me know what you think about the Lechonk League. I will have an update video coming out shortly that will feature like all the legal cards from Scarlet and Violet in the format. So if you're interested in that, do let me know. And yeah, it's been Ember Power, and thank you for watching.